Kwekwe, greetings. Kwekwe is Algonquian for hello. Hello and welcome. Um, Today, we're going to attempt to read the full article that we've only read portions of previously, and we're going to try to go through the muck and mire of how a system justifies conquest. If we were to lay out a a time capsule of some sort in how the United States government has dealt with the Indians that they misclassify as Black, we would realize that this is just conquest. I can't even call it commerce because Indians have not engaged in commerce. We're just basically combating a big bully sitting on the land who is just having a ball, I guess, being here. And I think what our country, our beloved, ancestral, beautiful America is offering these thieves, these criminals, uh, I think what it's offering them is just a big plantation. It's just a bigger plantation. If you look at a map of Britain, you wonder what's so great about that little piece of land over there. It's by comparison, it's just um, yeah. It's conquest that makes uh, Britain great, apparently. But it's a conquest that relies heavily on religion and high deception. And I don't often like to call out Britain specifically, but as an American Indian, how can I not? You know, uh, it's again, I mean, they had help for sure. Uh, and we know, again, we'll always say King James was a whole Negro. So it's the Caucasian face is not the root of the issue. Uh, I know it sounds almost fantastical to constantly talk about these priests, but I hope people begin to see when you really lay this out, it was a church that came for America with a papal bull called the Doctrine of Discovery. It was religion that they had to use on a very spiritual people, to take them down. So we want to try to realize and always tie back to that point, that fact. When you look how alleged laws affect American Indians, you will find that it all relates to the doctrine of discovery. Even more than commerce. I mean, we have a system of commerce here that is just as you know, uh, problematic as the doctrine of discovery, what commerce is doing is taking the role that commerce is the only law. Because once you get rid of the people of that land, you have a lawless land. And they can't run it as the original people, so they can't use birthright in the Americas. They have to use commerce. So a religion comes, genocides the original people of the land, and so now they just have to use that land as a big source of commercial exchange of some sort. I mean, we know that it's highway robbery of the Indians, so-called Indians, but so that's what happens once you take away the original people, and the world knows this. You can't really use law of the land because only the people of the land can make the laws of that land. But if they're considered gone, genocided, then the construct that is here feels that it can use commerce to replace true law of the land. So hopefully we'll get to see some of this in action in the slides you're going to look at today. So here is the article, one of the first articles that I did a video on. I think the first video I did on this article was uh ooh, it, uh it's not a tax exempt. Tax is not a tax exemption. I think that's the name of the video where I first read this article. But oh, there we go. First John. Okay. But we never went into the article because we wanted to focus on the phrase Indians not taxed was not a grant of tax exemption. Rather, it described the status of Indians at the time the Constitution was written. Indians were not taxed because generally they were treated as outside the American body politic. They were not United States citizens. So remember in the last video, I said we would look at a third document, but we didn't because we are going to kind of look at another part of it. This is that document. Okay, so now we know this is what we always read from this document, and we did read a little further down. But today we're going to attempt to, again, go through the muck and mire of the body of this article, because we're going to show that there is an elaborate house of cards uh, when it comes to pulling Indians, not taxed, into a state of complete domination when at the beginning of their constitution, it's laid out that we are not under their jurisdiction. They still find a way, not only to, now you got to hear this part, ladies and gentlemen. Not only do they pull us into their jurisdiction, but they're claiming complete domination. So if we were to take this at face value, what is actually happening is that The United States federal government, Congress, actual dictatorship over what they call American Indians. But of course, those are the Native Americans. But, you know, it, they stuck the Native Americans on our land. So I don't know if we talk about that often, but the Native Americans are taking up land as well as the federal government that is also not their land, particularly the ones in the five civilized tribes. The Mongolian Indians of the five civilized tribes that live in the southern states, they are taking up space on, I hate to say it, uh, my ancestors' land. But the government is having them represent me. Said it before, I'm going to say it again. America might be the biggest crime scene on the face of the planet in terms of how guided by the Constitution this thing is. I want to say this too. We have to begin to see that corporations, they are the least bound to the Constitution. Now, the federal government is, but when it comes to really stripping Americans of their rights, really that's happening through the corporations, the various corporations. I think of an example, but when you work for a corporation, they have their own set of rules, but those rules, they have the effect of bringing you further away from constitutional, like Bill of Rights. It's like you walk into a corporation, and the corporation is almost like a version of a state. And what I'm trying to say is that's where your commercial laws are really flying all over the place. It's like you're stepping in. It's almost like stepping into a workplace is like stepping outside of the Constitution because you're under commerce now, like directly. Now, this whole thing is commerce based at this point, but it always was commerce based. It's conquest slash commerce. And it is a crime scene because it still relies, if not on outright genocide of American Indians, it's a form of terrorizing American Indians. When you constantly see copper-colored men and some women and how law enforcement deals with them, there's videos all over like TikTok and YouTube. And, I saw recently a video where a woman who is a judge was stopped by a police officer. And I don't know if any of you have seen this video in the course of, uh, you know, uh, dealing with this woman. She's in a car and he's questioning her parking her car in that parking lot, which is apparently just for people who work in the court because she's a judge. In the course of his very disrespectful exchange with her, now she's a woman of color. She would, but remember, Moors are they're versatile. They know that when we see them, we think it's us, right? But a lot of times, I think they take part in these little episodes that we see. You know, it's a form of terrorism because you look at a video like this and you realize this woman is a judge, and look how she's being treated by law enforcement. Now, you or I, a regular average Joe, we wouldn't be able to do what she could do when she spoke to him. But I tell you, she really didn't stand up like I think she could have. But anyway, in the course of this man dealing with this judge, he actually cracks her tail light. In other words, because he felt that she was being, uh, you know, disrespectful, in other words, I'm going to uh, make a reason to give you a ticket. So he covers his camera, his chest camera, and you can hear that he breaks her tail light. After she told him, I believe it was after she told him she was a judge, she did. I mean, she did seem to not, defend herself the way I think she could have. I think she should have told him up front. And she probably did, because I believe she said she works here. Uh, but anyway, I say this to say that's a form of terrorism because you're seeing that this is pretty routine, for law enforcement to act this way. And that's why I say it's so important. I don't see how any American Indian males would not run at the chance to tell these officers that they have no jurisdiction to stop you point blank, period. So that'll be a whole. Anyway, we are talking all over the place. But yeah, I say all this to say that, after all, if you were to have some kind of time capsule, you'll see that this is all conquest. It has very little to do with upholding even commercial laws. It's about we came to your country and you are our worst enemy because this is your country. So we're going to, every chance we get, we're just going to be messing with you. I mean, they don't have to mess with us this way, but I guess they always knew we'd wake up. And so they have been taunting us forever. It's just endless. And that's why if Indians don't make moves to exit, get out from being under the domination of this federal government that is not supposed to dominate us. That's what makes it so ironic. This is a lawful standing that American Indians I'm sorry. And this system found a way to just ignore it. It's written down, and they are still ways to ignore what we're looking at. It's not tax. It was not a grant of tax exemption. Rather, it described the standing. We want standing. Indians don't live in states. We don't have a status. Citizens do. We have birthright standing. This described our standing at the time the Constitution was written, and it was supposed to be forever. It wasn't supposed to change. As long as these knuckleheads are here, these knuckleheads are here. This is what is supposed to be the deal. But I'm telling you, y'all, that this is just part of the work. We still have to fix or eradicate the Commerce Clause. Uh, there is a problem with the Commerce Clause. It is not consistent. They've made it a multi-purpose clause where they can treat foreign nations with respect while they can completely dominate tribes. And there's a problem because here's how we're going to say this once and for all, because I say it, but I never complete the thought. If we are Indians not taxed, and we are outside of the jurisdiction of the United States, we need to gather to create our system of justice, our law system, which is the law of the land. It will be the law of the land. In order to do that, we must have tribes. We can't be separate Indians for too long. We can do it, but the goal is I need a structure around me to hold my standing on the land. See, what this government did was single us out to leave us standing and stranded and then argue about, should we tax them? Should they be citizens? No, your system is lopsided because you're trying to pull rank over Indian tribes, but we're going to need our tribes to not be federally recognized. If we are sovereign Indians, big newsflash, our tribes have to be sovereign because what you're trying to do is leave me stranded without support so that you can dominate me. So they figure if they can pull Indian tribes under subjugation through the Commerce Clause, then that means Indians never have access to natural resources in their land on that reservation. And we're not going to be limited to reservations. It just doesn't make sense, y'all. There's far too many of us, and this government knew that, to be limited to reservations. So our form of justice, our justice system, will not be limited to a reservation. It can't be. There's too many of us. You see now why they had to try to keep this charade going? Because one thing leads to another. An Indian not tax is going to need other Indians because we're not, you can't single us out so that you can dominate us on the down low and leave us where, nothing in your system or nothing in the state is being made accessible to Indians who were always here. When I say that, what I mean is, you know, this requirement that you have to have a federal ID to just get around in a state. No, you got to drop that requirement when it comes to Indians. See, this is what they never want to have to do, y'all. So they figure we just have to genocide them forever or as long as we can. I'm sorry, this you can't do that. You can't because you're a liar, untrustworthy, without integrity, a deceiver, a thief. That's not our fault. You can't subjugate me because you never want to face the music. You're going to have to face it. Every person on the face of this earth should never feel like they have to leave their home land to find peace or to find justice. And the way things are set up, I do believe this government is trying to, it's like a Venus flytrap to the world. Come here for freedom. Yeah, well, what did you do to my homeland to make me feel like I need to run to you for freedom? And by the way, is it your house that you're inviting me to, or are you asking me to come find freedom in some other people's home? That's what your Moors are doing, y'all. Okay, so we did our little, you know. So we want to try to get through this article because we've seen the good. Now we're gonna see the bad and the ugly of this article, you know. So the American Indians, this is from encyclopedia.com. Excuse me. American Indians and the Constitution. Indians are mentioned only 3 times in the Constitution, yet the Supreme Court has developed a vast body of law defining the status of Indians and tribes in our federal system. This law makes use of constitutional sources, but also draws heavily on the history between Indians and the federal government. What is the history? Let's stop for a minute. 1 minute. The history between Indians and the feds, or anything that foreign that came here, is one of we are seen as heathen. So he's correct. They are drawing heavily on a history that deemed us inferior and uh, just primed and ready to be dominated by an unjust legal system. So the writer is saying this law makes use of constitutional sources. It picks and chooses what parts of the Constitution that it's going to go by because it doesn't go by Indians not taxed. Um, but also draws heavily on the history between Indians and the federal government, including wars, conquests. Oh, yeah, now you're talking. Treaties that were bogus, and the assumption by the government of a protectorate relationship toward tribes. Protectorate. As we said when we first did this video, but you didn't protect us from you. It's interesting that he actually said it draws heavily on conquest. That is so interesting because that might be the only word that really is telling the truth next to wars. The treaties were not real, y'all, because we were seen as heathen. We didn't have a right to treaties. That was conquest. And the assumption by the government, assumption, they make several assumptions, especially when it comes to American Indians, y'all. And most of those assumptions are based on the doctrine of discovery, which has been repudiated. It reveals that our government is not only, as is popularly believed, one of dual sovereigns, federal and state. The state is over the federal, but somehow the federal, okay, I'm going to stop again for a minute. I'm so sorry. The federal has a larger of 14th Amendment citizens than the state does when the federal assumes to be dictator over 14th Amendment citizens. Now we know that the original 14th Amendment citizens were nothing but Indians, right? These were the uncivilized Indians that became um, the first 14th Amendment citizens, because those were the citizens. Again, I'm basing this on how I look at the story as we are commonly told. So the Indians were the indentures, right? Those indentures were treated like slaves. So when the federal government goes to make a citizenship for them, it is they who are the first 14th Amendment citizens, right? And there are far more Indians uncivilized than there are, I believe, any other people in the Americas. So the federal government is living off of the income it gets first from the 14th Amendment Indian indentures. So that might be how it became a little more powerful than the states because it has, what did it say? Plenary authority. They have a plenary authority. And how can we forget the federal government, unlike the states at one point, they charged everything to 14th Amendment citizens. So the federal government has like a disposable income or whatever, and they also have a credit card because they don't pay their bills. The federal government says that 14th Amendment citizens cannot question the public debt. Now, citizens of the state never had that kind of situation. They were not forced to pay the government's bill. 14th Amendment citizens are bound by the 14th Amendment. They cannot question the public debt. I think we even had a screenshot up. This is section 4 of the 14th Amendment. The validity, now the 14th Amendment is for 14th Amendment citizens, right? They are federal, not state. They started out federal. These are Indians who were indentures. And instead of them going back to being Indians not taxed, the government found a way to make them permanent. And you go so if you are an indenture permanently, you have now become a slave. So what might be a definition of a slave? An indenture who started out, excuse me, working a contract to a slave who is just a slave forever. This is what the 14th Amendment made of American Indians. The validity of the public debt of the United States authorized by law. And like we said, we don't read, let's cut to the chase, y'all. You'll find that this is how the Constitution got around a lot of their shenanigans by overloading sections of the Constitution with many words. But you know what? We want to make it as plain as we did this before. Let's do it again. We just want to cut to the chase. Stop with your blabbing. We want to know exactly what you were saying. Let's get to the point. The validity of the public debt of the United States. for a 14th Amendment federal citizen shall not be questioned. Stop blabbing all your bullshit filler and break this down to what are you saying? You just made you just made indentures permanent slave to a debt. That's what you did, Congress. Y'all are some, it's like just a can of sliminess, right? Little worms, right? Y'all, it still hits me. And you just, on, this is beyond reprehensible. It's just, I'm looking at this. I just can't believe it, y'all. I'm right now. I'm having a moment. Okay, I'm having a moment. The validity of because why am I having a moment? Because this is happening to American Indians. So what did I say before? This whole government is based is disenfranchising American Indians for this thing to keep running. And I'm going to say it again. This is why you can't effectively convince me that this was built by American Indians. But you were thrown a bone, and it was a very wordy-gurdy bone that leaves you where you don't even understand what Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3 is saying. So this is what I mean. You were thrown a bone. You did not build this system. Someone covering their ass, y'all. There's a difference. Hear me, please. Hear me, please. There is a difference between someone doing something for your benefit and someone covering their ass. Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3 is some foreigner, a Moor, or disciples of the Moors, covering the Moors' ass. But they had a plan. Remember the Hegelian dialect. You already have the solution for the problem. So the problem is Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3. You better believe they already had a plan to void Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3. Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3, it is to deceive American Indians, thinking that this was something you would want. Because I know for sure, I know this for sure. Whenever a law, when I saw any person of color talking about the law, they were all talking commerce. That's why I know Indians did not build this system. It was a Moor who was very well versed in commercial codes. These are the ones who have an understanding of commerce. Indians are just taken along for the ride. It's a Moor in their family that is telling them uh, or teaching them law. But what they're failing to tell the Indians is that this is all commercial law. It is not law of the land. America has never seen law of the land ever since the Negropeans showed up. What did the Negropean bring? What did the Moor bring? He brought you commerce because he took you out of the picture and therefore said, because there's no Indians to make law of the land, I, the one who looks like the Indian, the Moor, I'm going to bring my beautiful commerce because I know how to work commerce to make it look like it's providing an Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3. But then I'm going to go to my Commerce Clause and I'm going to take care of that real quick. But most of all, again, they're relying on the doctrine of discovery. So, okay, so there you have it. The validity of the public debt of the United States shall not be questioned. It's one sentence. We just gutted it for all the extraneous bull crap and went to the end of the sentence. The validity of the public debt of the United States shall not be questioned. Does that not sound like a dictatorship to you? Does that not sound like you are bound to pay somebody's bills and you cannot question it? Well, that's what they're putting on American Indians. Again, the 14th Amendment was created for emancipated, quote unquote, slaves. What did the slaves have that the quote unquote slaves, what did the slaves have that the United States had to get? That would be their land. That's why they're so concerned with uh, providing a citizenship and emancipation and blah, blah, blah. But you should have just used law enforcement to stop the terrorizing of Jim Crow South, right? But you were behind Jim Crow, basically, the federal government, wasn't it? Am I saying something wrong? And Indians think they built this system that allowed for a Jim Crow era and stood back and didn't do really anything. Indians better figure out the difference between a Moor and an Indian really quick. I'm telling you, those Moors are really messing you up. They got you taking the blame, as I said before, for everything they did against you. If there's no plaintiff, the criminal goes scot free. If he convinces the plaintiff that, no, you wanted this, we did this. Look at the pictures of the first Republicans. Them is you. And that was your uncle, yeah, he married into the family. Yeah, these people married into American Indians family and then began telling these Indians that knew nothing about the legal system all about commerce. But look what they're charging you with, American Indians who were emancipated and lost your land. They're charging you with the debts of the federal government. Do you know how big that debt is? You better claim you're Indian and tell them that you don't owe them a damn thing, like I had to tell a senator. Yeah, yeah, that's what we're going to have to do. So I was looking at one of my videos, and there was a piece I read that said the only way an Indian can begin to not be considered as basically an object of domination for the federal government is if he expresses it. And we got to find that because that's key. So, in other words, you have to say something. And Indians, let me tell you, let's have I know I'm a little hard on you because I get upset. But right now, I'm calling a brother circle. It's not hard to pick up a pen and begin to write and tell this system who you are. At first, I was apprehensive, but what I realized as I sat to formulate these letters is that the ancestors have prepared me. They just tell me, just say what you need to say. Back up your words with all these documents we provide for you. Say what you have to say. You don't have to do it in any special format. You're a sovereign. You got us behind you. Just say what you need to say. So I will end up sharing some of these letters I wrote because I think you American Indians might want to see what I'm talking about. Okay? We have to do the show. There is no justification in enslaving generations of people under a system that never respected them and still does not. There is nothing you have done so wrong to deserve your generations, your new precious generations, to live as you have lived, subjugated to a demonic, selfish, covetous, foreign system. Indians, I'm telling you, you can love your Moorish family, but love them in a way where you demand respect. What do I mean? When your Moorish family wants to talk about his ties to Mali and how great Mali was, you might want to remind him, you know, Mali is still there. And because you're on my mother's homeland, you're going to learn to respect my mother. If all you can do is talk about Mali and you can't tap into your American side of the family, consider your voice muted. I don't want to hear it. Indians have to get adamant. You are being genocided with the mouth of these Moors, instilling in you a pride in Mali they don't even have. Because if you had so much pride, you would have stayed your ass in Mali. You would go there right now and you would stay there. So shut up about Mali. I'm tired of hearing about I saw this Joe Rogan video. This brother, he started out on fire telling Joe Rogan that these was black folk. Now I believe he used the word black, but I could deal with that. But then he Then he said the magic words. I couldn't believe it, y'all, because you know how I always go to Mali. And then he said Mali. This was today, y'all. This was today. So Moors are always going to talk about Mali. And as an American, what I have been through, and I say, fuck Mali, you got to know where I'm coming from. I don't want to hear about Mali. I want to hear about, if anything, South America. And what was there that drew the likes of Columbus stank ass? That's what I want to hear. See, Mali wasn't that important, but you're being psyoped because they're going to, when they talk about Mali, first of all, they're pulling American Indians off of their homeland yet again. You're in America now, son. And if you can't learn to big up America, you need to go back to Mali. If the first thing that comes out of your mouth is Mali, you got to understand something. That is, they get to call us African. We're not African. I'm here telling you that I'm American, and you keep talking about Mali. You're disrespecting me again. Again, if Moors love their Morocco and Mali so much, why the hell are you here? Put your money where your mouth is because you got a big mouth. If you can't talk about America's greatness, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. You had your time. And if you are so dedicated to Mali, again, take your ass to Mali. This is how Indians have to get. When any person of color is talking to you about Africa, put up your hand. Put your hand up. How dare you? How dare you? How dare you stand on my ancestors and show me all your devotion for Mali while your feet are standing on my ancestors? How dare you? What are you trying to prove? Go home. If you can't love up on my ancestors while sucking off their tit, go the fuck home. Tell that to anybody that starts telling you about some damn Molly. Ugh. People don't understand what respect is because they're not used to respecting American Indians. The only reason why they're big up in Mali, because Mali is Abrahamic, y'all. It's one of the Abrahamic religions. American Indians are being condemned because we didn't know nothing about it. How are you going to condemn people who don't even know about your religion? It's not that we rejected it. We never knew nothing about it. And yet we were the heathen while Mali was celebrated for being Islamic. And Indians don't see there's the problem here. So we kind of took a, yeah, like we said, it's just, apparently you just have to bang on the beats every chance you get. Okay, so we just want to show that, yeah, oops, we had fun with that, right? Mr. Trumbull, but Mr. Hendricks is the real deal. Okay, so where were we? Oh, that's another. Where were there we were. Okay, so American Indians and the Constitution. Uh, it reveals that our government is not only, as is popularly believed, one of dual sovereigns, federal and state. There is also a third sovereign, which is the first sovereign, consists the only sovereign. Let me correct that. The only sovereign, consisting of Indian tribes. It just baffles me how they try to make Indians sovereign, but Indian tribes not sovereign. So Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3, Indians are sovereign. But Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3, Indian tribes are not operating limited but distinct sphere. It ain't supposed to be limited. We're supposed to be the only sovereigns. This was not meant to be forever. But in some of these European nobility's minds, I just can't believe how thirsty they are for our country. I mean, if you love God like you claim to, why can't what he gave you be enough? Why, you've convinced yourself that you have to take what belongs to someone else. So you're really running the risk of your God being seen as a God of thieves. But you don't care, right? As long as you get what you uh, was looking for, the little lustful ambitions. What do they have to do with any upright God, third sovereign? Why you even use that word when you claim to have plenary authority? Is what kind of uh I don't even know what to call y'all. It just is complete opposite of what they're saying here, right? The three references to Indians in the Constitution presage this body of law, federal uh, Indian law. That's not what do you call it? Yeah. Uh, wait, did he bring that up yet? Yeah, a vast body of law, federal Indian law, which Peter DeRico calls federal anti-Indian law. Anti-Indian. Supreme Court developed a body. A court can develop a body of law. Did you catch that, y'all? So we we're not represented in Congress, but the Supreme Court. How did I miss this? Are Indians looking? Do you see this? How the Supreme Court made our laws? Um, so you mean when we stepped into your court and lost all three cases, boom, you made our laws? I'm not even gonna say that I'm one of the civilized tribes, but civilized tribes, again, they must be getting something else because they're not interested in justice, right? And they won't fight the power. And when I say fight the power, I'm talking using the law and using uh your lawful standing, I should say. Because as a true sovereign, you have more say than any of these foreigners. Yet we live in a twilight zone where, well, not exactly. Yeah, in your world, it's not exactly because you're the thief. Don't know how I missed that, y'all. So they realize that we're not represented in Congress because isn't that who makes laws? They realize that Congress can't make, so they just shot us straight up to the Supreme Court. And Supreme Court developed a vast body of law. See, a lot of Indians think that the Supreme Court is like the archangel of courts. They have changed the nature of this. That's why I know Indians did not build this. So Indians, the Supreme Court makes your laws. Did you design it that way? Are you ready to admit that you did not create this government? Because it's breaking every rule. The whole point of having a three-part, system was it like some checks and balances going on? But allegedly, well, this is not our system, but I'm just saying. So with you, that didn't happen. If the Supreme Court is making all your laws like this, oh God, I can't believe it. It's like the more you learn, it's just the worse this thing looks. Yet Indians are mentioned only three times in the Constitution. Yet the Supreme Court. So that means Congress wasn't even involved. I mean, they're not supposed to be, but this system says Congress is supposed to be involved. So they're breaking every law or every protocol to come for you Indians. And you think you built this? You got this beast going outside of protocol to dominate you? I it's just that's a mouthful right there, y'all. So if I'm reading this correctly, it is the Supreme Court that delivered us to Congress and gave them supreme power over Indians. That's what Congress think it got. When we started out in the Constitution as completely not part of this government, now Congress has complete and total authority. Y'all are bugging all the way. It's like this semi-bugging, you know, there's three-quarter bugging. There's going beyond the laws of bugging. Y'all, oh my God, the Supreme Court has developed a vast body of law. Wow, interesting. I'm sorry, I just let's move on. Let's move on. I told you this is the bad and the ugly. We saw the good, and I'm hoping I can focus enough because I'm so busy being blown away. I don't know if I could get through the bad and ugly. It's just, but I didn't realize the ugly pop up right in the first or the second sentence here. Yeah, because we just focus on this part. But that's just the bait, y'all. Obviously, Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3 was the bait and trapped us Indians in this diabolical system. All right, now, so we read this paragraph already. There is also a third sovereign consisting of Indian tribes operating within a limited but distinct sphere. The three references to Indians in the Constitution presage this body of law. So it was the Supreme Court that made this vast body of law. Shocking. Unbelievable. The three references to Indians in the Constitution presage that body of law. Two of the three are found in Article 1 and the 14th Amendment. which exclude Indians not taxed from the counts for apportioning direct taxes and representatives in Congress among the states. The third reference is a grant of power to Congress in the Commerce Clause. Grant of power to who? See, this is weird. I'm glad he put it that way. So if Indians built this system, that means it was you who granted the power of Congress to regulate your natural resources in commerce. So are you sure you built this system, Indians, where you gave all your power to Congress to regulate your most precious, the only thing that's going to uh, uh, afford you a living, your natural resources, you gave it all to Congress, right? You gave them the authority, right? You Indians who built this system. You know I'm not letting up on you, right? I want you to understand the Moors built the system. And just because they married into your family, that doesn't mean you built this system. Again, might have handed the hammer and the nails, but you did not draft the plans. You're not the architect of the system, American Indians. You were taken over in conquest. And then when you married the Moor, he's using you to say that you built this system. And when you say that, it really makes Indians look like they're their own worst enemy, and the Moor was your best friend. Out of the two, who do you think is your best friend or the Moor? The third reference is a grant of power. Who granted Congress this power, American Indians? Was it you? Was it the civilized tribes that went underground, like Judge Brown? What do we mean? When an Indian says that his people chose to be called black. So that's what I mean. So Judge Brown is an underground Indian reborn as a black. And he's not the only one. He's just the one who gave us a clue. So we should thank him, right? He let us know that he was very emphatic too. Oh, we chose to be. That's what we wanted to be. No, Judge Brown, it was your tribe of Indians that wanted this. Your civilized tribe Indians infiltrated by Moors. Um, the uncivilized Indians did not choose to be black. They were seen as the losers in the war, and that's why I think partly why Congress is trying to have us pay all their bills. They look at us as the perpetual losers. Okay, that's why Indians. You sure you built this system, or was it your Moorish family? Stand before your ancestors. I hope by then you will have the right answer. If you don't tell them that uh, we built this system. Um, Unfortunately, this is how it has to be. Why? Because what the Indian is not realizing is that the Moor has an agenda. When he comes in your family, there's a whole uh like set of baggage. And when he begins to unpack, you're going to realize he's setting up shop in your house. You're going to realize he's going to change the foundation and start to uh, imitate you. He's going to uh, claim your identity for what he's doing against all other Indians. He's basically using you as a sock puppet, punching out the existence of American Indians and flooding you with stories about Mali and how you came from Mali. Just can't believe that they take the same old narrative and feed it back to you. Now, we're always told that we're from Africa. We've been saying for the last several years, no, we're not from Africa. But then a Moor will come and he'll slip it in again. Well, we came from Africa. That's not what we said, Moor. That's what you keep saying. You came from Africa, okay? Why can't you own that like a man? Why can't you own that? You came from Africa, not American Indians. You do not precede us, so just stop it. You're the second uh, born, okay? And as I said before, that's something you chose to be when you really break it down, because you keep trying to make Africa older than it is, and it's not. So that's why you crave to become one with Americans, because you're going to talk them right out of first birthright of American. You're going to talk them right out of that position by the inability to shut your big trap in your allegiance to Mali. Again, if you're that dedicated to Mali, why aren't you there? Tell people in Mali, go tell those people can use your love and affection. Go build them up. We don't need you because it just tears us down and takes us off our land. You're not helping us, Moors. You're not helping us at all. Constantly trying to make us a younger people, saying we from Africa. Ain't from no damn Africa. You are. You are. It's one thing, again, to marry into a family. It's another thing to eat that family uh, into oblivion from the inside out. Again, when you move to somebody's country, the onus is on you because that's why you came, right? You want to be here, you want to be part of this, you want to be, but the thing with a Moor is he's gonna come and he's gonna continue, and he's just gonna say, "Well, you from where I'm from." That is so disrespectful. You're supposed to be trying to find out about my history, my story, and it's not your story. So just shut your trap. Yeah, you come in at a certain point. You were not here from the beginning, according to your own narrative. So let's just leave it at that, okay? You can be from Africa if you want to be more, but don't try to make everybody African, because that shows that you're just grabbing. So we read that. The third reference is a grant of power to Congress. Okay, Indians, if you keep taking responsibility for this, that means you gave Congress the power to dominate you. Do you see why you got to stop saying that? They weren't supposed to dominate you. So if you granted them some kind of power, that means you gave them your sovereignty. But that would only be the civilized tribes, again, because this country actively genocides right up to today anything that they have deemed uncivilized. The hell gave you the right to call civilized when you're so uncivilized? Phrase Indians not taxed was a grant. I'm sorry, was not a grant of tax exemption. How could I get that part wrong? Rather, it described the status of Indians at the time the Constitution was written. Indians were not taxed because generally they were treated as outside the American body politic. They were not United States citizens. And we usually leave it there, right? But like I said, if we ever get to it, we're going to try to deal with the bad and the ugly. This all, after this point, y'all, it goes rather downhill because, again, this was the bait of a Moor to make it look good for the world. He carved out a little spot for you that was quickly filled in with commerce and drowned you in commerce as he's still trying to say you're from Mali. They were not governed by ordinary federal and state legislation. We weren't supposed to be governed by any federal or state legislation. What don't you understand about having no representation? How can they govern us when we don't have representatives in there? We're not supposed to. Oh yeah, that's right. The Supreme Court uh uh created a body of law. So you're grabbing again. They just can't leave us alone, y'all, because they had to have all of our land. You see, when someone doesn't want to share, that's the least you could do. The least you could do is share. These bastards didn't even want to share. They didn't want us to have any control on this land, y'all. Do you understand what this government is doing that you built? Allegedly, Indian. Tribal laws, treaties with the United States, those treaties were bogus. And tribal laws, if the federal government is creating them, they are federal laws. Stop using tribal. See how they just cover their own ass every freaking time? Tribal laws. You just told me that the Supreme Court developed a vast body of laws defining the status of Indians and tribes in our federal system. A vast body of law they made. Tribal laws. They call those federal tribal laws, y'all. It's not Indians making them. Treaties with the states, the treaties were bogus. They were done under conquest, so they're not valid. They were, in fact, conquest, point blank, period. The United States. Yeah, you got us limited to dealing with you, federal government. When the states had more power than you by the original design. So it's like we were the target, y'all. That's why I say they were more concerned with us than they were with citizens because they had to find a way to dominate us exclusively. What do you mean special? Federal, it's special because it ain't supposed to be. We don't need special. We don't, we didn't give the, not, well, I can't see how Indians gave them special uh, uh, right to make legislation. Does China make special federal legislation for Russia? See, that's how you kind of get back on track because this shit, they make it sound like it's normal. This is not normal, y'all. Tribal laws, treaties with the United States, and special federal, and that's a lot you got going on over a sovereign people. If we're a third sovereign, what the hell are you doing? Tribal laws, treaties with the United States, and special federal Indian legislation govern their. You don't need to be governing any of our affairs. You need to give us our land back and go to fuck home. You act like that's not possible, right? Why isn't it? What do you hate so much about your home? It's not big enough to host throngs of slaves. That's what the problem was. You were king, so you needed more land to have more slaves. Only the few Indians who had severed their tribal relations and come to live in non-Indian communities were treated as appropriate for counting. Ooh, in the constitutionally mandated apportionment. I don't even know what to say to this. They're talking in circles, y'all, because Indians not taxed were the ones who severed their tribal relations. So they're not taxed, they're not counted. But now he's saying only the Indians that severed their tribal relations were appropriate for counting. So you just talked a full circle of bullshit. Indians, the tribal Indians were the ones that the government was pulling authority over, but those are only civilized tribes. But it was Indian tribes that are quote unquote regulated, which it means dominated in their trick book of trick knowledge. They think regulate commerce means dominate entirely. So only the few Indians who had severed their tribal relations and come to live in non-Indian community. Listen, every part of this country is Indian community or on Indian land. There is no such thing as non-Indian communities because the land is Indians. Where are these communities congregated? Oh, on Indian land? Oh, okay. Oh, I just want to be clear. But see, they're making an assumption. Only the few Indians who had severed they're still Indians, not taxed though. It didn't say that in other words, you would have to prove that they knowingly became citizens. I'm going to say that that's what the civil rights, see, we were being misled with the civil rights. You say you did want to be a citizen. Okay, so then why did you create a new citizenship, a federal one? If we wanted to be citizens, allegedly, because I don't believe we knew what the hell we were doing, then why did you feel a need to create a new type of citizen? Why didn't you just make us like any other citizen that existed? But at this point, knowing how they deal, who would want to be? If you're an Indian, why would you want to be in this? All they did was sort of like, I don't know, like uh use all kinds of nefarious shenanigans to undermine our sovereignty. That's all they did, y'all. And then grabbed us and made a new citizen that's only federal. And like we saw, we are bound to pay their bills. So all they needed us for was to pay their bills, y'all. And so that means if they rack up a debt that's taller than Mount Everest, that means they know we can never pay. And so they get to presume that everything that we have belongs to them. And that's exactly how they see us. Look on your deed or title to your house. Are you a owner or a tenant? Is your car registered? Then it's not yours. Does your baby have a birth certificate? Then the baby is not yours. Because the debt you owe, you pay the debt with your babies. They own your car. They're the owner of your house if you're not claiming your American Indian birthright. So not only did they shove us into a citizenship, they gave us the citizenship where everything we have belongs to them because we are responsible for the debts. You sure you want to be a citizen, Indian? Do you know what you're saying? Much like everything else we've done since this government appeared, I don't think we ever knew what we were doing because this is not our system. When you create a system, I'm going to say it again, you know it like the back of your hand. You know it. They didn't even teach civics in school. Indians, if did you make that decision, Indian, for your system to not be taught? You didn't make this system. You didn't create it. Stop it. Only the few Indians who had severed their tribal relations and come to live in non-Indian communities were treated as appropriate for See, that's why they had to misclassify us too, because they know that if you identify as an Indian, you're not supposed to be taxed. So again, these are nefarious shenanigans, and then they fix up the loose ends by just coming up with like calling us black. They know that the Constitution said that's why you didn't design it, Indians. You wouldn't have made it where it would be that there would be a way to finagle us into a lesser standing on the land. Indians would have made it tight. Remember, I used to always say that the Constitution wasn't tight enough. If Indians made it, it would be tight. Indians didn't make this system, and the wording shows that we don't even know the wording. We don't like to read it, you won't understand what it's saying. You have to get interpreters, legal uh specialists to break it down like this guy is doing, but then he's going to defer to domination when it comes to Indians. Like he'll tell you what it really meant, but then he's going to also rely on like the Commerce Clause and stuff like that. Well, he's not here. He's not going to say that the doctrine of discovery is part of this, but we do know that the doctrine of discovery is. See, they didn't list that in one of the things that they what do you call it? What did he say? Uh Draws on. Like here he says, uh, but also draws heavily on the history between Indians and the federal government. Well, actually, in a way, he is implying the doctrine of discovery because part of the history with Indians and this federal government is the doctrine of discovery. Because the doctrine of discovery brought this federal government here. That's the part that Indians are leaving out when they say they build this system. You really are getting the whole story twisted. Indians are acting like we had a system here, and then when colonizer came, he just pushed us out the way and amended our constitution. Well, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3 is not an amendment. That Commerce Clause is not an amendment. So conquest was built into the Constitution via the Commerce Clause. That's how I know we did not build this system. We would not have given the power to regulate our resources and our commerce to foreigners unless we were working with the foreigner and didn't know what he was actually intending to do. Okay. The phrase probably was chosen because the apportionment served partly to allocate tax burden. This is the bullshit, y'all. Uh, the phrase Indians not taxed was chosen because Indians were here before the federal government got here, and they were you couldn't just build a government on straight up conquest. You got to make it look like, oh no, we want freedom for all, you know. So you see, we're gonna call out this art. See, I didn't want to go through all of this bullshit, but it might be necessary, because this is the things that we have to combat. We got to combat what he's saying here. And so that's why we're going through this. They use that to draw us in, but we didn't create that, y'all. I don't believe we would have said it like this if we created. We would make it much more clear. We would make it much more clear. And we would use the term American and not Indian. See, do you see I'm saying that this was conquest based? Because they're still calling us Indians. In other words, you are so not respectable as a heathen. When you call us Indians, you're basically calling us heathen. When you call us American, that's respecting my person. Indians is kind of derogatory because it's not naming you with your land. It's some foreign entity coming and naming you. But there's ways around that, y'all. There's ways around that. We just have to state it. Like in my public declaration, remember okay, if you watch my public declaration video, it's the first video that starts playing when you're on my channel. There's a part where I say that I'm using the term Indian. And, but how did I put it? I forgot how I said it. But I'm an American. I forgot how I said it, y'all. I could look it up though. Maybe I'll do that later. But the point is, I'm letting the system know that that is a term that was put on me. I'm actually American, but I'm using the term Indian loosely. And that's why I said I reserve the right to self-identify. Although, yes, that's what I said. Although I'm called Indian, I reserve the right, oh, yeah, to identify due to some about bad faith with the United States, and it's exactly true. I'm using the misnomer, but I reserve my birthright to not have it define me, is what I'm trying to say. So, um, all right, that was the bait, right? But now we get into how they're gonna ignore all of that. They tell us that, right? And then here's how they ignore it. This phrase probably was chosen because the apportionment serves partly to allocate tax burdens. That aspect of the apportionment has lost significance. However, since the 16th Amendment made it unnecessary for the federal government to apportion income taxes. That just sounds like gobbledygook, y'all. It's like they're still talking like we don't have a sovereign standing. When you read something like this, realize you're not recognizing my sovereignty when you talk like that. So you're trying to say that as a sovereign, I was supposed to be taxed. And so that was just there, probably because it served partly to allocate tax burdens. No, sir. No, sir. It's there because I was here when you found me. I don't owe you a thing. Okay? You're making excuses. That's why I never bothered to read this whole article because it's a lot of bullshit you're dealing with, y'all. And we're going to try to deal with it because we got to look at how they are very trying to justify this domination and this jurisdiction that the United States is trying to legitimize over American Indians who were here before this government got here. You don't pull me into you. You learn to respect me. And that's something I've come to the conclusion it's not really in them, y'all. The whole point of conquest is to steal. No thief steals from you just to give it back to you. So I think that's how we got to realize that it's up to us to take this stand. This thing that's here, it knows how to come off at it like it's about justice, but it's like a whole demon. That's a face it's showing. It's not the face, the true face of the entity. It is not concerned with justice. It much prefers conquest and justice or the pretense of justice after conquest. Phrase was probably chosen because the apportionment served partly to allocate taxes. That don't even make sense. It just doesn't, it's reading weird. You allocate taxes to citizens, not to Indians. You are talking some crap. That aspect of the apportionment lost significance, however, since the 16th Amendment. If an amendment is going, I read that somewhere today, if an amendment is going outside of the Constitution or in opposition to the intention of the Constitution, it really is bogus. It really is up for elimination. Um, oh boy. So he's trying to say that some amendment made it unnecessary for the federal government to apportion income taxes. So now he's talking income taxes. See how they're introducing, they're sliding things in. So now he's trying this. Now that first mention of taxes is very generic, but now he's specifying that's the flim flam for the federal government to apportion income taxes. Corporations make an income. Men and women of the land make wages. So here's just another way that they're using commerce as an excuse to tax people that they shouldn't be taxing, including citizens that they shouldn't be taxing, because citizens shouldn't be presumed to be corporations, right? They make wages. In this system, you are like a most clever thief if you're taking responsibility for this system. The exclusion of Indians not taxed from all aspects of apportionment has, in fact, been muted by changes in the status of American Indians since ratification of the 14th Amendment. Now, what's hitting me now is, yeah, we're talking about Indians. So what is all of this? This article is about American Indians and the Constitution. You're trying to talk some babble here when this is not this is not about Indians. What this blue area right here. So what we're doing is we are going to shred all of this bullshit bit by bit because what we want to prove is that Indians not tax is not something you can try to bend and shape into something else. So stop using extraneous bullshit as a means to try to justify something that's unconstitutional. So instead of talking this crap here, you should have just went to how Indians are affected. So this is saying something. This is letting us know that they're using the 14th Amendment, something for slaves. Somehow they have twisted it, as we always say, to include Indian. Remember when I said that I think they are putting Indians not taxed in the 14th Amendment because they need to associate us with the 14th Amendment citizenship. Now, the debate that we looked at among the senators, one senator said flat out, it wasn't a question of citizenship. That was the dude that we all have love for now, Mr. Hendricks. Mr. Hendricks said, the 14th Amendment is about citizenship, but Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3 is about representation and taxation. So now we can rule out this part of the bullshit where he goes, the exclusion of Indians not taxed from all aspects of apportionment has in fact become muted by changes in the status of American Indians since ratification of the 14th Amendment in 1868. And wrong. Mr. Hendricks would tell you that Indians not taxed about citizenship. So Indians not taxed shouldn't have even been mentioned in the 14th Amendment at all. They needed to mention us there, y'all, so this kind of thing could be printed. So they could say something like this fool just said. I'm reading this and I realize I don't know whose side this man is on. Because there's parts of this that sounds like he's trying to tell Indians, get the hell out. And then there's other parts where he say, well, this is why they dominate you. So maybe it's a good thing that he is telling us how they're trying to dominate us, but it seems like he's falling for it. I don't know if he's writing this in code and trying to let us know this is what you need to address to get out. But I am a little offended because that blue part, I felt like he didn't have to go there. And that's what makes me think he's trying to insert some bullshit. The exclusion of Indians not taxed from all aspects of apportionment has, in fact, been muted. So they're saying because of the 14th Amendment, they don't have to recognize Indians not taxed anymore. I'm sorry, you are sorely mistaken. A commerce clause should not have ignored our standing, and a citizenship for slaves or indentures should not have interfered with our standing. We should not be taxed just because you're speaking about indentures. Indentures are only indentures for it's a contract. So if Indians were indentures, and we were, y'all, we were indentures, but see again, the conquest slips in and makes us prisoners of war. So they're trying to make us permanent prisoners, but they're using everything they can possibly grab to justify it. Like, okay, we have to have indentures, right? But we're going to say that they were slaves. We have to have Indians not be taxed, right? But we're going to say that they're black and now they have the 14th Amendment. No, the 14th Amendment, if it's If it's trying to nullify, if an amendment is trying to nullify a part of the Constitution that's not even an amendment, it's not going to fly. The amendment is wrong. The 14th Amendment is not in line with the intention of the Constitution. At the end of the day, y'all, all we're going to have to really deal with is the Commerce Clause. And we're just going to have to prove that the Commerce Clause is being used to still subjugate Indians, because if Indians are sovereign, they have to have resources. If we Indians, Americans, I should say, are sovereign, we have to have complete control of our land, just like this government is seeking to have, and it's not even an official sovereign. So then it uses a trust. You see how commerce makes someone a virtual owner of the land by giving them control of trusts? They really need to get those trusts busted open. The sovereigns are still here. We ain't dead yet, and we ain't never going to be dead, although you're trying to genocide us. That's why you have a trust. You're expecting us to be dead. That trust is not legitimate. It's not legitimate. Um, so now we can discard this bullshit because Mr. Hendricks showed us that trying to make Indians not taxed sort of synonymous with a argument on citizenship is not going to fly. It's about representation and taxation, not citizenship. They knew we were not citizens, y'all. So when you hear Indians talking about they are citizens and they want to stay citizens, know that they are compromised, know that they are working on behalf not of Indians, but of the government. So, yeah, wrong. Indians not taxed are not citizens. So the 14th Amendment, we shouldn't even be talked about there. They brought us in because we were indentures, y'all. That's what they're not saying. But again, an indenture is not a permanent slave. How do we become permanent slaves? Again, some more nefarious undertakings. Oh, you didn't pick enough cotton. Oh, you tried to run away like John Punch. Now we made you a permanent slave. This is all conquest. It has nothing to do with justice or law. When the white indentures ran, they just got a longer term of service. They weren't made permanent slaves. So again, what is justifying them choosing to make the man of color, John Punch, a permanent slave? The doctrine of discovery. It traces back to the doctrine of discovery, y'all, which was repudiated. There is a whole new dawn waiting for Indians to take. We've got to get out completely, though. We've got to get out completely. If you're half in the corporation, that means you're half available to be of any use to your American Indian family. You got to get out and make a way for them. You've got to make a way for them. You got to be like a Harriet Tubman, even though she wasn't really real, like Dan Calloway said. And you know what? I don't doubt that he is correct. You've got to make a way. If you're half in the system and half out the system, being a 501c3 or a civil life tribe, you're not helping the people to get to freedom. that little bit of money that you're getting is just a fraction of what is owed to you. Did you check out my video on reparations? Please see the rough minimum that they think is owed to those that they are calling African slaves. I just wanted you to get an idea of when they do talk reparations, they actually came up with some numbers. But again, we don't want their money because the value of money goes up and down and up and down. And they, Lord, could you just imagine when if they should ever give us that amount of money, they're going to immediately devalue it. That's the power that they have. That's why the land is much more important. Credit would be excellent. In other words, don't even deal with the dollar. Just make it that when an Indian walks into any establishment, his bill is paid. As long as this system is here, it should be paying for all of our any expenses that we have. We got cheated out of commerce, y'all. They are using our resources. They are using our resources and making a killing. We see nothing. We are working as if we're just another foreigner here, like we squirreling away money. The only thing is, the foreigner squirrels away money and he takes it back home a lot of times. One of my supervisors actually did that. He made his money here and he just went back to Spain. And now he's living I could imagine he's just living a wonderful life. Indians deserve that right here. That means we shouldn't be paying for anything. That's how you can begin to make this right. Because of what you owe us. You owe us everything. You owe us everything. You robbed us of our identity. We have no land ownership, so we cannot even have commerce without this government dominating that too. And what is regulating commerce? Sticking on some kind of tax so that the federal government gets paid? You're not supposed to get paid from us. Anyway, I'm going off on a tangent again. It's not really a tangent, but it's relative. So, treaty, okay. So they're saying that because of the 14th Amendment, that we're no longer Indians, not taxed. Just like when they say the Commerce Clause took away our sovereignty because uh, they have plenary authority. All the effort to ignore Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3 and make it like it doesn't exist. This is showing that this system was not designed by Indians. I don't care what anybody says. Why would we do this to ourselves, y'all? And not even know that what these shenanigans mean when they happen. If we designed it, we'd be on top of this. It would never happen. The Indian tribes ended in 1871. And in 1924, all native-born Indians who had not already been made citizens by federal statute were naturalized. I think we know that that's bullshit too, right? Were we ever naturalized? See, now they're mixing characters. I, this should be talking about Native Americans because the Indians, the original Indians that were misclassified Black because they were the original Indians, were never naturalized. What federal statute is going against the Constitution? When you said we've been made citizens, I think they're trying to say that we chose this, y'all. And that's why what Judge Brown said that day is actually that's going to make it like we chose this. Like when he says we chose to be black, we got to make sure that we uh contextualize that. Uh we did not all choose to be black. And so, but being black will lead to you needing a 14th Amendment. An Indian doesn't need a 14th Amendment because he's not a citizen. He's not supposed to be. So only these imagined slaves needed a 14th Amendment. And check it out. If they were made permanent slaves, do you see how this would put them under duress to want a 14th Amendment? Say now, one of these courts that Indians said they built sentenced a John Punch to life of slavery. So now John Punch needs a 14th Amendment to have any hope because if he doesn't take it, he's what, just a slave? Or now a 14th Amendment is still a slave, but for him to be go through the in other words, he was taken off of the property that he probably owned as an indenture, and now he's gonna probably live in the north looking for an apartment and stuff. So now he has to be a citizen, because if he was emancipated off of his farm, well, where he gonna go? You know? But so it's like they just set a trap for us. We run them, make them slaves like we did with John Punch. If they try to run away, oops, we just extended your indenture for life. Now you're a permanent slave. Now you need a 14th Amendment so we can emancipate you from that slavery, transfer your slavery to the federal government. Instead of being a indenture on your family's farm and you inheriting that farm, we're going to emancipate you. And now you're going to leave the South, come up north, and be a slave to the federal government because, as we saw, their debts shall not be questioned. So you're more of a slave now than you ever were when you were an indenture, if you were an indenture. Treaty making with the Indian tribes. All native, blah, 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 blah. Indians were held subject to federal statutes, including tax laws. They just completely flipped the script on Indians. So now we're basically just like an immigrant. So this was the goal of this entire system. That's why I know Indians didn't really build it. This system it already had a goal in mind. So Indians were just tricked into it. They already had a roadmap to grab Indians and make them foreigners on their own land. Indians were held sub. Notice how they say federal, not state. It's telling you right there, y'all, you are a federal citizen as a United States citizen. White people were not federal citizens at first. They were not subject or they could question. the public debt, unlike a federal citizen that can't question the national debt, the public debt. There you have it. They just told you. Indians were held subject to federal statutes, including tax law. Well, that's the one that they want the most. They want that money, y'all. And it's just crazy because it feels like some kind of a soul trap. Because I don't feel like they need the money. They want the money because your blood, sweat, and tears are in that money. You work for that money. You toil for that money. A little bit of your soul every time they make you just give all your energy. It's federal beast. Your ability to be a true entrepreneur. An American Indian is the ultimate entrepreneur because they own the land. But anybody can, in this commerce system, anybody could, capitalize off of Indians' land and resources. It's a demonic system, y'all. Federal statutes, including tax laws, except where special Indian land. I mean, what is the use of that we're special in? The bottom line, Indians were never supposed to be under federal. Y'all can make it sound like this. They got some right to make some special legislation. You're out of your mind. When you say special, what you're really saying is unconstitutional. That's the hidden word there. Special means unconstitutional because the Constitution says Indians are not taxed. And I read a piece that said whenever the Constitution says something in other words, it's stated plain, Indians not taxed, it's almost like a phrase. They say you don't have to build any more legislation on something that's already clear. I saw that today somewhere and I was like, wow. So, in other words, there's nothing you can build upon Indian not tax because it says it. Stop trying to quantify it. Stop trying to limit it. Stop trying to minimize it. It's clear. Indians are not taxed. And then we saw one of the senators, Mr. Trumbull, when asked, when it says Indians are not taxed, do they mean by federal, by state? And Mr. Trumbull's answer says, by anybody. Indians are not to be taxed by anybody. You see? So all of this is reading not well at all, y'all. It's relying on the 14th Amendment. It's it's just mixing us in to a mix that we were not supposed to be mixed in. Why? Because African slaves never had a standing, right? Indians always had a standing, according to the Constitution, as Indians not taxed. So even if you temporarily find a way to cheat us out of our birthright standing through indenture servitude, once we're out of that, we're supposed to go back to Indians, not taxed. But they knew that they had to have a system that routes Indians away from that Indian not taxed and calls them black. And once you call us black, now they just can treat us like we're any immigrant, but not any immigrant, slave immigrants. People, so they're telling us that all Africans came here as indentures. I mean, as slaves. But the truth is, they're even saying the African slaves were indentures, which I don't understand because that changes history. If the African slaves, if there were any real African slaves, because as we said, Dane said, if I remember him correctly, these were people being brought from the Caribbean. So, but I'm saying they change history. If they're saying that African slaves were indentures, that's what the Jim Crow Museum is saying, and that's what the timeline that we looked at from that Almanac of the Civil War, that's what they're saying. They're saying that these were indentures. The first few quote unquote Africans were, how do you put it, classified as indentures. So that means there was a work contract of some sort. What I'm trying to say is that it's looking like they're trying to tell us there was really no slavery in America. It was indentured servitude that they morphed into permanent slavery. It didn't start out permanent slavery. To deny Indians, they have to say that we were nothing but slaves, so there's nothing for us to turn back to. In the case of an Indian, yes, we do have something to turn back to. It's being outside of your system. And if we're supposed to be outside of your system, that means you can't come at us in any kind of retaliation. So Indians were held subject to federal statutes. That's a laugh, including tax laws. Oh, yeah, that's the ones you really want. Except we're special India. Ah, come on. There is no legislation that is constitutional that should be making Indians subject to federal government when they are sovereign. You even said it in this stupid article when you said there's three sovereigns. Then why is one sovereign being treated like a slave? Just call a thing a thing, but stop trying to act like this is just normal because it's not. 1940, the Department of the Interior officially recognized that there no longer were Indians who could properly be considered Indians not taxed. So you have just voided the Constitution to make Indians subject to your federal public debt in perpetuity. Now that they don't want to change. Your Indian not tax standing, they will finagle and finagle and make sure that you get weaseled out of that. But the part that little amendment where they say you can't question the national debt. They ain't trying. They don't see that that can be nullified. That's an amendment, and they making it like that can't be voided. But they can void an actual article in the Constitution. They think that being permanent slaves is that doesn't have to change. By 1940, the Department of Interior officially recognized. That's why we have to call up left to their devices. They're going to make sure that we never are in, they're getting all our energy. Our energy is, that's why we're not sovereign for real when we're supposed to be. If you're living off of my energy, you're, what are you? Why are you depending on my life energy? Those pennies we make are hard earned. So they're feeding their deity, y'all. They're feeding their deity. And I think, I try to figure out why it's so important for them to take money from us. Why is that money so special? Because we're paying more than anybody and we're making the least. So our money, when we put our energy in that money, it gets infused with our suffering, our life force. And that is what is being fed to the deity that they forced us to serve. It has to be what it is, y'all, because there's a spiritual element to this. They have all the money in the world, but there's something about money passing through Indians that allows them to offer up our energy to their deity, to the God that they're serving. The God they're serving has given them what belongs to us. And in exchange, they have to feed us to him. That's why they really, they, when you, okay, again, if you're already rich, why do you need to still oppress me? Why can't you take your money and go home? Because they're feeding a beast. The beast sustains itself on eating the souls of American Indians. Death cult, y'all, and I'm telling you, no American Indian should ever want a sacrificial system as their religion. They shouldn't want that as their spiritual system because you are the sacrifice. If you don't see that by now, you're not looking distracted. Our life energy is being transferred to their money. Them constantly overcharging, uh, gouging, charging us more than they charge others. Our money's infused with energy. Others, it's just being given to them in many ways. There's no struggle. When Indians look to make a dollar, there's a lot of struggle, a lot of energy. And so all of this is why they like us to pay more. It's like they're sucking us, trying to deplete us of our life force being fed to their deities, allowing them to stay here and continue. The Department of Interior, this is an agency, right, of the federal government. So the federal government makes all these little department of this and department of that and department of this. And then it looks, so that's how they're making laws basically for Indians. Because all these departments they're getting the biggest payday from Indians. There's more Indians in America Then there are citizens. Because we're not supposed to be citizens. Now, if you take every black person out of this system as a citizen, all that revenue goes back to us because we're not going to be paying tax. We're Indians, not taxed. So it wouldn't go to them. They wouldn't be able to tax us. So by taxing us, they're feeding off of our energy. We are what make their money sweet. We sweeten the pot with, say, for, and I hate to do this to you Caucasians, but money tends to flow to you a little more easily. So your money is not as, it doesn't sweeten the pot because it's coming to you a little easier. When that money passes through the hands of American Indians, it's infused with a struggle. We don't tend to have as much to work with. So our money is very precious in a way. Now, y'all know that I'm a land over money type of Indian, but I can relate to the struggle to have a dollar because of limited funds, right? Whereas, you know, I have a friend right now who I swear it's like he's just limitless. He's, of course, he's Caucasian, uh, and I'm not picking on him. I'm not faulting him. It's just how it is, you know. Um, it's just how it is, and it, you see it. You just see it. Okay, that's all I'm saying. You can see it. I wouldn't be able to do what he is doing. Um, my friend has gotten to a point and an age because he's not a spring chicken. Neither am I, but but it's he's and if he listens to this video, he goes, "You're talking about me," not in a negative way. It's I'm just trying to show that it doesn't come as easy for the average American Indian. We don't have access to a lot of wealth. It's just a fact. That was the whole point of conquest. When a thief comes, he's going to steal the most of your belongings, the things that would support you and your wealth. They're going to be taken. We don't have access to our natural resources. It's all these corporations that have more access than we do. And corporations they're almost like the tentacles of the federal government. A corporation is basically funneling back to the corporation. Yeah. Yeah. And they get all kinds of breaks because a lot of what the feds are getting is coming from like for instance, when a corporation say supports a candidate running for public office, something like that. When you're getting your corporations and your foundations or whatever. I'm just saying that whereas the federal government was kind of limited in its ability to completely dominate citizens, a corporation is dominated by the federal government. It just is because it's a creature of the federal government. A corporation is a creature of the federal government. But anyway, we're getting off track. I guess we're gonna just read this article because I keep stopping. Indians were held subject to federal. That's ridiculous, y'all. To go from being a sovereign to being under your colonizer is just, it's not the way to go. And when you hear Indians saying that, know that they are agents of the government. No Indian should be directing other Indians to stay in this oppressive system. It is oppressive. And then when you become an Indian, and you're still getting oppressed because you don't have any control. When you become one of these civilized tribes or 501(c)(3), you're still oppressed. They're just giving you their power. It's not the other way around like it should be if any power is going to be given. It's coming from the owner of the land. But you're still in a situation where you're going to a big foreign daddy to direct your path as a 501(c)(3). Uh. By 1940, the Department of the Interior officially recognized that there no longer were Indians who can. Well, there's one right here, y'all. I ain't writing these letters for nothing. I don't care what the Department of Interior says. You better read the Constitution. Are you in line with the Constitution, Department of Interior? Do Indians know that this is what they're agreeing to when they don't even know that they're Indians? What exactly is this system doing? It's just doing too much. Are you talking about the Native Americans right now? Because they're not us. The Commerce Clause, here we go. So we see the 14th Amendment, the Commerce Clause. These are the things that eat away at Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3. And that's what they were meant to do. Now, the Commerce Clause, that's the one that is going to take a little effort because they're going to consider, they're going to try to say that, well, that's part of the Constitution. Well, that's why the Constitution is not really sufficient. If I am one of the three sovereigns and I object to the Constitution, my voice has weight because all this is taking place on my land. I am the real sovereign. Outside of commerce, I'm the only sovereign. And commerce shouldn't be making people sovereign unless it's relying on nobility that brought the corporation here. And in actuality, that's what's happening. States are considered as if the king granted the state sovereignty. But even if that wasn't the case, the state is still a creature of nobility. Nobility created the state, not the we people, immigrants. And the states are named after these nobility, like Carolina, named after King Charles. So, if it's not direct nobility, it will be one of the hierarchy, in the nobility. Maybe the king might want his earl or his duke or some shit. to have a state too, you know. Um, Indians don't live in states. Indians live on their ancestral land if they have any dream of being sovereign again. When I say sovereign, what do I mean? In control of your land and resources. You charging rent, you making the price. And if it came to building, Indians, you don't have to go by any building codes. There's just a lot that we have to start to take in a civil manner because it's our land. And then if there's a foreign entity on your land, it should be paying you as long as it's there. When you have a tenant in your house, right? For as long as they are there, they are paying you. They are paying you. And rent ain't cheap, right? This rent would come with penalty. It should anyway, because it's back rent. Say Indians shouldn't be paying for anything. You have an active tenant living on your land, and the only excuse it has for being here is the doctrine of discovery that was repudiated. So your shenanigans have just been halted. To continue to make your residence my ancestral land. Indians had this thing they call tribute. In your world, you call it rent, roughly. If you're a foreign entity and especially corporations, because they are the ones that are really making a killing. You can afford to pay some rent. And guess what? Indians decide what that is. You tell us how much you're making, and we figure out how much. That's how they do with us, Indians. When you go to fill out an application to live in an apartment, they want to find out how much you make because they're going to make sure that they take like 2/3 of that, right? They want to make sure that you are just making it. Rent, the way this system do rent, it is no joke, y'all. It's as if it's meant to make you struggle. At least when it comes to American Indians. Remember, we ain't making the same amount that other races that are classified white are. So if that's how you had Indians living on their land, paying exorbitant rent, how you corporations think that we shouldn't charge you? You're making the most. It would be interesting to find out how many of the corporations were launched in the Americas. It really would be. Um, when you think about the railroad moguls of old, one of those millionaires was into the railroad. And so you're using my land to make your trains. So you still bring in a killing from your railroad. Shouldn't Indians see some of that? You're on my land, traveling in your train over my land, and you're a $1 million or whatever corp by this point a corporation, and you don't think you owe American Indians things like that is what we're talking about. Um, no, it's not meant to cater to. Okay, the idea is every man to his homeland and make the best of it. And if there's things you need in your homeland, you must pay the piper. That's all. That's very equitable. And it's it's very basic. What we had was nobility that felt if you have something, I want it. Just because just because I feel like I am what do you call it? The divine right. Like you have something, I don't have to pay for it. I'm going to use it to make myself rich. That's the motive of those people that consider themselves nobility. And that's what America's a victim of, nobility. So nobility feel like they don't have to pay, but in fact they can steal. That's a really uh a rather unprecedented set of circumstances. So you don't have to pay for anything and you can steal everything. And that's just how God do with you. I guess one man's God is another man's devil. The Commerce Clause, reference to Indians by contrast, continues to have real force that it should not. All of this is undermining the Indians' true standing as a sovereign. Since the abandonment of federal treaty making with Indian tribes in 1871, now who came up with that one? Did the Indians want that to happen? But we forget those weren't really treaties anywhere. And that's why they abandoned them, because they knew that them shits weren't legitimate. They said we conquered them already. We don't need these treaties. They were just for the appearance of equity, but they're just for show. Do you see Indians how everything was used to get you into a system that is singling you out for domination? So they when they say this so casually, it's like they're not considering that this was not a choice made by Indians. Apparently, it was the Supreme Court because you said the Supreme Court made the body of law, large body of law. So somewhere in the Supreme Court, but Congress actually is saying that they have plenary authority. So both of them are just dominating us like a tag team and shit. Since the abandonment, who abandoned federal treaty making? The government. So already they bossing up on you. They saying we ain't gonna do no treaties with you. Go sit down over there. It has been the primary constitutional provision. Yeah, because that's not an amendment, but it's not in line with the intention of Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3. This is Section 2, and they're going further down to Section 8 to erase Section 2 when Section 2 came first. Now, if the Commerce Clause came first, maybe we'd have a problem. But the fact that Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3 is separating Indians from this system, how do you take over our commerce if we're sovereigns? How do you use a Commerce Clause to take away my sovereignty? The abandonment. Well, it's an interesting choice of words. Who abandoned treaty making? They're just making us like as if we're subjects. For real, for real. They got us in the clause with foreign nations. Did those foreign nations, did you abandon treaties with them? No. Wasn't one person making that decision if and that just fly. So it was, oh wait, yeah, the Commerce Clause reference to Indians by contract continues to have real force. Since the abandonment of federal treaty making with Indian tribes in 1871, it has been the primary constitutional provision supporting the exercises of federal power over Indians as such. So by them controlling our commerce, they get to dominate us. But all sovereigns have land. A sovereign, I recall, must have land. So with that land comes resources. So why would the federal government get to control another sovereign's natural resources? Why? And they are really jiggy with it because they're doing this to even tribes on reservations. So the reservations don't really belong to Indians. The federal government feels like they're giving those federal Indians land. They don't look at it like that was always the Indians' land. Notwithstanding its reference to commerce with the Indian tribes, the clause also applies to transactions with individual tribe Indian. So here we go again, completely ignoring individual Indians not taxed. They're bossing up on the individual Indians in the tribe. See, they use Indians in a tribe to dominate, but they don't see that Indians not taxed are not to be dominated. So what I'm trying to say is it's like a double standard something going on here. They don't want to admit that Indians not taxed are not tribal Indians. And that's a big problem. But now we see that they're going a step further to say, oh, even the individual Indians in the tribe get to be dominated, including some off-reservation transactions and to non-Indians doing business on reservations. So they are, oh boy, Congress. Congress's Article 1 power to regulate the territory or other property belonging to the United States. So they're looking at reservations as belonging to the United States, and that is categorically incorrect. This is crazy, y'all. All of this is voided with the doctrine of discovery, and it should be voided by Indians because we have the power to void it. If we're sovereign, just like when the North bossed up on the South, and that was just a corporation, Indians have much more power than a corporation. The North illegally bossed up on the South, made them adopt the 14th Amendment. Yeah, Indians are sovereigns. The South was not treated like a sovereign. So we have the power to reject the Commerce Clause. We have the power to reject. And the rejection would be based on the fact that as a sovereign, mentioned in Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3, I require land and the resources are mine to regulate. I don't need a foreign, again, China doesn't regulate the resources of China, do they? No. Whole system was ill-conceived because it's a stranger people, a group of strangers that sat themselves in your kitchen and proceeding to bake cakes with your ingredients, have bake sales, doing, and you sitting there in your kitchen while this foreigner is literally getting paid for everything it's making in your kitchen and don't want to pay you a dime, but yet want to dominate you every way it can so it doesn't have to pay you a dime. This entity is again, in our home, selling our resources to foreigners and getting a profit and don't want to pay us. It's just inconceivable. This is Article 1 power to regulate the territory or other property belonging to the United States. Since when do the people that originate on the land, when does their property belong to a foreign entity? This is conquest, y'all. This has nothing to do with even, uh, I don't know what to call it, any kind of religious edicts. This is just straight up conquest. It's ungodly, is what I'm trying to say. So Congress's Article 1 power to regulate the territory or other property belonging to the United States supplements the treaty and Indian Commerce Clause powers. They got too much power that no one gave them, y'all. They're interpreting things to just mean, like when they say the Commerce Clause gives them plenary authority, how? Where's that word? That word's not in the Constitution. So regulate is their little magic word that in their book of spells, regulate means dominate. Most Indian lands are held in fee by the United States, subject to a beneficial tribal interest in reservations set aside by treaty or executive order. This is too much of one sovereign calling domination over another, what they call sovereign. They're not treating you like a sovereign. This is just a lot of grabbing going on, is all I see. Most Indian lands are held in fee by the United States, subject to a beneficial tribal interest in reservations set aside by treaty or the United States shouldn't be holding Indians' lands, point blank, period. We should be parceling out land to you, not you. Remember, this is our ancestral. It's not your birthright. You don't give us land. We rent land to you if we so choose. And boy, way you treated us, rent gonna be high. This power to make war. So now they're threatening. There's a little element of threat here. Say, not only do we have the power to take everything you have like it's ours and tell you where to go and how to get there, but we do have that little power to make war. Really. I think you better take a look at the repudiation of the doctrine of discovery and think about uh, your authority and what they said about what you're doing and what they no longer support. Congress's power to make war. So they trying to say Congress can war against the reservations or the Indian tribes. Congress's power to make war was also invoked in the early years of dealing with the Indians. You have done is wage war against Indians. Don't kid yourself. Everything you do is against Indians. Nothing to benefit them. This combination of powers, read together with the necessary and proper clause of Article 1 and the supremacy clause of Article 6, has been the foundation of a complex structure of federal, state, and tribal relations. Supremacy? That is another magic word, y'all. So, what they're trying to say is you might be a sovereign, but they have supremacy, a supremacy clause. So, Indians, this doesn't look like an amendment. This is a clause in Article 6. So, some Indians are trying to say that, oh, the Constitution was ours, but then the amendments are not ours. Hmm. Well, we know that the Commerce Clause is not an amendment, and that's fucking us over. But now we're hearing about an Article 1, uh, I'm sorry, Article 6, Supremacy Clause. Did Indians build that? So the Supremacy Clause has been the foundation of a complex structure of federal, state, and tribal. It's the federal government that has domination over Indians. The state is just tagging along for the ride, but really it's the federal. The federal made of itself or for itself a whole pool of slaves of American Indians. And they have direct access to those Indians that the state doesn't have. The federal government's power over Indians' affairs is extensive and preemptive of state power. See, they just said it. So, yeah, complex structure of federal, uh, you know, it's federal that's dominate. But at this point, the state has become federalized, and that's why people like Anna are trying to defederalize states and make states what they were originally meant to be, which is have more power than the feds. The state was here before the federal government, so technically, it is a higher power. And who was here before the state and the federal and the international? American Indian. So who's the top HNIC? All right. Know it. Know it. So the federal government's power over Indian affairs is extensive and preemptive of state power. See Cherokee Indian cases, 1831, 1832. That shows that the feds stepped in and overrode the states to dominate the Indian tribes. And those tribes lost those foundational cases. Right now, we know that they're talking about the John Marshall cases, right? In the 19th century, the courts called the federal power plenary, and challenges to its exercise were labeled political questions. In fact, this federal authority is a general police power comparable to Congress's power over the District of Columbia and the territories. A police power, don't we know all about police power? American Indians. I tell you, don't lose it when Chauvin gets pardoned by Trump. Try not to lose your lunch. I mean, you should expect it, unfortunately. So challenges to Congress's plenary authority labeled political questions. In fact, this federal authority is a general police power. This is strictly over Indian tribes, y'all. This complete domination and police power. And I'm hearing, to me, what I'm hearing is this is why they're able to do what they do when they apprehend men of color, like George Floyd. Comparable to Congress's power over the District of Columbia and the territories. This federal beast, it has territories that it treats like its property, whereas states are not so much. But when this United States, I don't know what it does, what buy land or steal land, that's more like it, from some poor little indigenous, they call it territories. And they have complete control over their territory. So, in other words, the federal government could be the full dictator it is when it comes to these territories, even though the states are being pretty much run like territories too. Again, that's why Anna exists. She's trying to get this domination of states to stop. She's saying that they are state citizens and not federal citizens. You see, in Delaware Tribal Business Committee versus Weeks, 1977, the court held that ordinary constitutional strictures apply to federal Indian legislation, and that under the Fifth Amendment's Due Process Clause in particular, such legislation must be reviewed to determine whether it's tied rationally to the fulfillment of Congress's unique obligation toward the Indians. Even though this trust obligation has not prevented Congress from enacting laws contrary of Indians, the Supreme Court now insists upon some determination that Indians will be protected when disadvantageous laws are passed. Thus, for example, Congress may not take Indian property for a non-Indian use without paying just compensation. This is what we're talking about, y'all, just compensation. Every so-called Black person is due just compensation for the complete and utter domination of their homeland by this federal system. And they're getting revenue based on our ancestral land. Where's my just compensation? While you're still making it. Okay, so that's a mouthful here. We'll try to read it again. In Delaware Tribal Business Committee, okay, in Delaware Tribal Business Committee versus Weeks, 1977, the court held that ordinary constitutional strictures apply to federal Indian legislation. So it's like you just part of the ordinary in an Indian don't make you special. You just part of ordinary as you like everybody else. And that under the Fifth Amendment's Due Process Clause in particular, such legislation must be reviewed to determine whether it is tied rationally to the fulfillment of Congress's unique obligation toward the Indians. Even though this trust obligation has not prevented Congress from enacting laws contrary to the best interest of Indians, the Supreme Court now insists upon some determination that Indians will be protected when disadvantageous laws are passed. Thus, for example, Congress may not take Indian property for a non-Indian use without paying just compensation, and it may not arbitrarily give tribal assets to some tribal members but not others. You mean the government could come in and deal with Indians' assets and divvy them out? That's too much power, y'all. Well, we already know they got way too much power that they gave themselves or use some form of conquest as if it's legitimate. Conquest is never fair. Conquest is conquest. It's one bully that think he has the right to what belongs to you. Point blank, period. Ugh. Anyway, a law that satisfies the tied rationally test is not constitutionally defective under the equal protection. Well, this is mumbo jumbo. What are you saying? A law that satisfies the tied rationally test is not constitutionally defective under the equal protection requirement of the Fifth Amendment's due process. What I'm trying to say, y'all, is the federal government, none of their laws should be applied to Indians because we're not represented in Congress, not supposed to be. What they did was create a new type of Indian called a federally recognized Indian, and that they can dominate. But Indians have to stand up and say, I am not bound or obligated to be a federally recognized Indian. I'm an Indian, not taxed. And when I form my tribe, they're not going to be dominated like your federally recognized tribes are. So that's a different entity than what the Constitution was looking at. So that's how we get rid of all this bullshit we're reading, y'all. Because the Constitution never said that the United States had a right to create or recreate Indians over into being federally recognized. You're supposed to deal with Indians no matter what type of Indians they are, because the Constitution never said that you can deal only with civilized Indians and fuck over uncivilized. The Constitution, see, y'all, see how they're relying on the doctrine of discovery by choosing only federally recognized Indians? In other words, only if you're civilized. So you're mixing church and state, where we're not part of the state, but I'm just saying you're breaking your own tenets of law. You're bringing in church doctrine for and making up laws that you shouldn't be making at all for Indians based on who you think is civilized. I don't have to be a civilized Indian, and you still have to deal with me. And I am talking about just justly, not dominate. For example, Congress may establish, let me see. Okay. Fifth due process clause, simply because it singles out Indians for special treatment. A law that satisfies the tied rationally test is not constitutionally defective under the equal protection requirement of the Fifth Amendment's due process clause simply because it singles out Indians for special treatment. For example, Congress may establish a preference for employment of tribal Indians with the Bureau of Indian Affairs, or may subject Indians to harsher punishments than non-Indians would suffer in state court for doing the same acts. Or they make us suffer more regardless. Such legislation is held not to constitute an otherwise forbidden racial classification because of the separate status of Indians under the Constitution. Interesting that they talk about racial classification. Such legislation is held not to constitute an otherwise forbidden racial classification because of the separate status of Indians under the Constitution, i.e., their subjection to federal and tribal rather than state jurisdiction. Making up little that they should dominate Indians exclusively and not the state. You see, the state had more sovereignty. Um, so they're cutting out the state. They want to dominate us exclusively. Although Congress has enacted laws governing a wide variety of activities on Indian reservation, what is Congress doing on an Indian reservation? See, the whole thing is just the concept is you might as well be dealing with a state, but they're saying that they have so much power, it's like more than they have over state, I think. There is no detailed code comparable to the District of Columbia's. Why? Although Congress has enacted laws governing a wide variety of activities on Indian reservations, there is no detailed code comparable to the District of Columbia. That shows that Indians are dominated by the District of Columbia, y'all. Direct subjects of the nobility. The District of Columbia is said to be a British territory. So itself, it belongs to Britain. That's why it's not a state. So their Indian laws are it's a wide variety of activities on the Indian reservation. In the absence of such federal legislation, states and Indian tribes have competed for control. The Supreme Court has repeatedly upheld tribal independence from state jurisdiction, basing its decision on preemptive federal power over Indian affairs. Oh Lord. They shouldn't have all this, but again, what we have to keep in mind is they're talking about Indians that they created. That's the key here. So I shouldn't be too offended. They're really just talking about a creation of Congress that are not the real Indians. The broad federal policy of setting aside lands for tribal self-government, although in cases outside Indian law, the Supreme Court has refused to apply preemption doctrine to exclude the operation of state law where congressional intent was doubtful. Uh, in Indian cases, it has inferred preemptive intent from the general purposes of treaties and statutes to protect tribal sources and promote tribal sovereignty. Thus, absent clear and express congressional consent, states may not regulate non-Indian activities that affect tribal self-government. Despite their lack of authority over reservation Indians, states are prohibited by the 14th Amendment from denying Indians rights available under state law. Indians don't want to be under federal. Indians are not supposed to be under state. We are supposed to have our own system. Within their realm of authority, Indian tribes exercise powers of self-government, not because of any delegation of powers, but rather because of their original unrelinquished tribal sovereignty. The Supreme Court recognized this sovereign status of Indian tribes in United States versus Wheeler, which held that it would not constitute double jeopardy to try an Indian in federal court after he had been convicted in tribal court because the court systems belong to separate sovereigns. See how they're half-assing it? So you want to say that we have a separate court system, but you're still dominating the situation and making it not double jeopardy. So in other words, they'll be harder than Indian tribes would. Anyway, the Constitution has never been invoked successfully to prevent Congress from abolishing tribal authority in whole or in part. But the Supreme Court has required a clear and specific expression of congressional intent before recognizing the termination of tribal powers. This canon of construction was established to implement the federal government's obligation to protect the Indian tribes. Some tribal powers were necessarily relinquished when the United States incorporated the tribes, such as the power to carry on foreign relations, the power to transfer Indian land without consent of the estates, and the power to without the consent of the United States, and the power to prosecute non-Indians for crimes. These relinquished powers are few, however, and Congress could restore them if they choose. Wow, so Congress is having all this plenary authority that it shouldn't have. Because the Bill of Rights limits only the federal government and the 14th Amendment limits only the states, Indian tribes need not follow their dictates. However, in 1968, Congress enacted the Indian Civil Rights Act, which conferred some but not all protections of the Bill of Rights on individuals subject to tribal authority. Oh, this is by Carol E. Goldberg Ambrose. There's a lot to unpack, but I can tell you most of this is you can just taste the bogus. This is all bogus, y'all. They're just grabbing authority. Uh, Bill of Rights limits the federal government, and the 14th Amendment limits the states, only the states. Need not follow their dictates. However, in 1968, Congress enacted the Indian Rights Civil Rights Act, which conferred some but not all protections of the Bill of Rights on individuals subject to tribal authority. See how they're just slowly making us like any other citizen? That is the problem here. On that note, I think we're going to close out for now because I'm starting to do that phase out thing. We did want to look at other things, but let's off for now. So I just want to get through this document to see how the system justifies what it does. And it's taking a lot of liberties. It's using some of the Constitution, but it all adds up to it's conquest. Conquest. And the doctrine of discovery has been repudiated. What we were going to try to look at, but not tonight, is those cases, the foundational cases. We just want to keep it up front and center that those cases were based on the doctrine of discovery. So the United States, when it goes outside of the Constitution with regard to Indians, go to is the doctrine of discovery, where they basically are using it to strip us of everything. We're going to close now. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, be and stay American Indian.